All right now, young'uns, and y'all sitting out there watching go on and tell me what time it is where you're at and where you're listening from. Ain't no shame in letting an old fella know who's keeping him company. Might be midnight in Kentucky or sunup in Texas, or maybe you're sitting way off somewheres I can't even reckon. Go on. Drop it in the comments, makes the story sit warmer in my bones, knowing I got folks gathered round from near and far. Now hush up and lean in close, 'cause I got me a tale older than iron rails and smokestacks. It's about a man folks called John Henry, the Steel Drivin Man. Some say he was bigger than life, born with a hammer in his hands, strong as the hills themselves. Others swear he was just a plain old laborer who worked himself to glory. But one thing I reckon we all agree on, John Henry's heart beat harder than any engine man ever made. Grandpappy, one of the little ones pipes up, was he taller than Pa? I chuckle deep. Child, taller than your Pa, taller than your uncle too, taller than a pine stretching for heaven. But it warn't just his size, no sir. It was something burning inside him. A fire you can't put out, not with rain, not with wind, not even with sorrow. See, back then railroads were spreading across this land like veins through the body. Men with hammers and spikes cutting through mountains, driven steel into rock, laying tracks to tie one end of America to the other. It was hard work, grueling, back-breaking, sun beating down, sweat soaking every rag on your back. And right there in the middle of it all, swinging his hammer true, stood John Henry. He could drive more steel in one day than 3 men together. Folks stopped their own work just to watch him, mouths hanging open. They said when he swung, the earth itself listened. His hammer rang like judgment, striking stone and iron clean. And every time he brought it down, it was like he was saying, I belong here, I belong to this work, I belong to this land. Did he never get tired? Another child asks, eyes wide as saucers. Lordy, course he did, I say, patting the child's head. Ain't no man alive who don't get weary. But John Henry carried something heavy, heavier than them steel rails. He carried pride. He carried the hope of all them men swinging beside him, hoping their sweat meant something. He knew the work was bigger than one man. It was the story of flesh against iron, heart against machine. Now I reckon some of y'all sitting out there know what's comin'. Progress don't wait. Them company men brought in a newfangled steam drill. Big contraption, hissing and churning, built to eat through rock faster than a man ever could. They said it would make the hammer obsolete, put men like John Henry out of work. The young uns gasped, one covering her mouth. They was gonna fire him? I lean in, voice low as embers. They was gonna fire all of 'em, darlin'. Every man with calluses on his hands, every back bent under the sun. That machine didn't need rest, didn't need food, didn't sing no work songs. Just hiss and pound, hiss and pound. Company bosses grinning like foxes, saying this here's the future. I looked round at the children, then out past them, straight toward you, my listener, wherever you may be sitting. But a man's got to prove hisself, got to stand tall when the world tells him he's small. John Henry looked at that steam drill, and by golly, he weren't about to lay down. The porch grows quiet. The children lean in closer, eyes glittering like lantern light. And you watching, I can near feel you leaning closer too. That was the day, I whisper slow, when John Henry threw down his gauntlet. The day a man challenged a machine. Asterisk, well now, you'll best sit tight, 'cause this here's where the tale picks up a mighty head o' steam. Don't forget, I still want to know what time of day y'all are listening and where you're from. Keeps me feeling like we're all sitting on the same porch together. Reckon some of y'all are hearing this in the quiet of the night, and some with coffee steaming in the morning. Either way, bless your heart for staying. Now, like I told you, John Henry saw that steam drill puffing and snorting, and he knew right off it weren't just about hammering steel. No, sir. That contraption stood for something bigger. It stood for the way the world was changing, leaving flesh and blood behind for gears and iron. The boss men came strutting, talking slick, waving their hats. This here machine'll outwork 20 men. No need for tired hands or sore backs. Progress, gentlemen, progress. They grinned wide as if they'd swallowed the sun itself. But John Henry, he stepped forward, shoulders broad as barn doors, voice deep enough to hush a whole camp. That drill ain't got no heartbeat, he said. Ain't got no soul. And I reckon no machine's gonna make me lay down my hammer. Not while I still draw breath. The men cheered, hootin' and hollerin', but there was fear mixed in, 'cause everybody knew deep in their bones that a contest was brewin'. It weren't just man against machine. It was man against tomorrow. One of the young uns tugs my sleeve. Grandpappy, was he scared? I leaned back, stroking my chin. Scared? Sure as shootin'. Don't you think even the bravest man feels a shiver when he stares down something bigger than himself? But fear ain't the end, child. Sometimes it's the beginning. So it was set. John Henry against the steam drill. Hammer against piston. Flesh against steel. They'd picked a tunnel in the side of a mountain dark, damp, mean as sin. Rock so tough it made lesser men weep. The machine was wheeled in, huffing like a bull. John Henry stood beside it, hammer in hand, eyes burning steady. The whistle blew, and the contest began. The drill clanked forward, pounding against the mountain with a rhythm hard and heartless. But then came the ring of John Henry's hammer, true as gospel. Bam, 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 each strike like thunder rolling through stone. Sparks flew, sweat poured, and the mountains shivered under the blows of man and machine alike. Men crowded close, mouths hanging open. Some rooted for the drill, thinking no man could stand against progress. Others prayed under their breath, hoping John Henry's arms would hold. The children here gasp when I tell it, but back then, grown men gasped just the same. John Henry swung with both hands, every muscle singing in time with his heart. And that heart said, clear as day, I am more than gears. I am more than iron. I am alive. The mountain swallowed sound, the air thick with dust. Sweat stung his eyes, but he didn't falter. The drill hammered faster, hissing, belching steam. The crowd leaned closer, wondering which would give first, the man or the machine. And somewhere in that dark tunnel, where light barely touched stone, John Henry grinned through the strain. By golly, I say, looking out at y'all, he meant to show the world what a human soul could do. Asterisk now. Y'all hold on to your seats, 'cause things get real thick in this here part of the tale. Reckon I ought to remind you, again, don't you go forget to drop where you're listening from and what time it is. Makes a fella feel like we're all huddled round the fire, sipping sweet tea and laughing at old talies together. So the contest raged on. John Henry's hammer rang out, steady and strong, pounding into that stubborn mountain like he was beating out the very beat of his heart. The machine hissed and ground, pistons churning, like it was trying to swallow the whole rock face. Folks held their breath, eyes wide, lips tight. Some of the men cheered, some muttered under their breath, and the young uns, bless their hearts, just sat there, mouths open, wondering how any man could swing like that. One of the little ones whispered, "Grandpappy, how come he don't stop? Ain't his arms gonna fall off?" I chuckled low. "Lordy, they'll ache something fierce, but John Henry's got something stronger than arms or legs. It's pride, it's grit, it's love for the work itself. Every strike's a piece of his soul he leaves in that rock, and every strike tells the machine, 'You don't run me, I run me.'" By noon, the sun had climbed high, beating down through the few shafts of light in the mountain tunnel. Sweat ran in rivers down John Henry's face, dripping onto the hammer handle, making it slick and heavy. The drill hissed steam, pistons pounding like the hooves of a stampede. The men working nearby wiped their brows, nervously peeking at the contest, knowing this wasn't any ordinary day of labor. "Grandpappy," one child piped up, eyes bright. "Did he ever think he'd lose?" I shook my head slow. I reckon he knew it was mighty close. Every man knows there's always a chance of losing. But John Henry, he weren't counting chances. He was counting heartbeats, and every heartbeat shouted, "I won't quit. Ain't no machine gun heart like a man's heart." The children leaned forward, some clutching the hems of their dresses or sleeves, holding their breath like they were standing right there in the tunnel. And I reckon you out there, listening, feeling your own chest tighten a mite too, 'cause that's the thing about a story like this. It don't matter where you're at. It grabs you by the ribs and shakes you dot as the hours wore on. The machine began to falter, pistons slowing, valves smoking. John Henry's arms screamed, muscles knotting like rope, but he kept swinging. Strike after strike, stone after stone, the tunnel began to yield. The crowd gasped in wonder, some crossing themselves, some hollering, some just watching in awe. "By golly," I whispered to y'all, leaning closer so you can feel it in your bones. That hammer, John Henry's hammer, wasn't just iron meeting rock. It was will meet fate, flesh meet progress. And every swing said, clear as a bell, a man can still shape his world if he's willing to bleed for it. Now don't you go blinking, 'cause there's more to this tale than muscle and sweat. You best be ready, 'cause the heart of it, that fire inside John Henry, is just getting started. Asterisk all right now. Y'all settle in and keep them ears sharp. Don't forget to holler back where you're watching from and what time it is. It tickles an old fella's heart, knowing folks from all over are leaning in close dot. So there he stood, hammer swinging like a man possessed, sweat and grit mixing like mud on a summer day. Every strike rang through that mountain tunnel like it was speaking a language only men of the hills could understand. The machine puffed and hissed, trying to keep pace, but John Henry's rhythm, well, it was something else entirely. It was the heartbeat of a man who knew he mattered, who knew the worth of sweat and toil, who carried the hopes of all them men who swung beside him day after day. One of the children snuggled closer to me. "Grandpappy," she whispered, "doesn't he get scared of the steam drill?" I shook my head, voice gentle. "Ain't no man without fear, child. But John Henry, he had something stronger. He had determination. He had pride. He had the fire that comes when a man knows he's fighting for more than himself. Hours stretched on. The sun moved across the sky, light dancing through the tunnel, highlighting dust and sweat alike. The men watching, some hiding their worry, some shouting encouragement, couldn't tear their eyes away. Every strike of John Henry's hammer sent sparks flying. Every pound echoed like a gospel song in that cavern of stone dot. By late afternoon, the steam drill started to falter. Pistons slowed, valves hissed and sputtered, and the machine groaned like a weary beast. The crowd muttered among themselves, amazement and disbelief writ on every face. Could it be that a man, flesh and blood, bone and muscle, could outwork a machine built for speed and strength? One of the older children gasped. "Grandpappy, is he gonna win?" I leaned in, voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Child, that there's the beauty of it. John Henry's fight weren't just 'bout win or lose. It was 'bout showing that the human spirit, strong and stubborn, can hold its own against the cold steel of progress." Every strike he made was a defiance, every bead of sweat a testament. A man's heart can still shape the world. As the sun dipped lower, John Henry's arms screamed with exhaustion. His muscles were tight ropes under skin, veins standing proud, yet he didn't falter. His hammer swung with the weight of hope, of pride, of every man who ever bent under the sun and put steel in the earth. The crowd watched, breathless, as the machine gave its last hiss, slow and reluctant. John Henry swung once more, hard and true, driven the final spike deep into stubborn stone. And then he stood, chest heaving, hands calloused and bloody, eyes bright and fire-filled. The children here gasp audibly when I tell it. And you out there, I reckon you're feeling your own pulse quicken. That, my friends, was the power of a man who refused to be counted out. By golly, that day, John Henry proved something mighty, that heart and soul can still defy the cold march of progress, if a man's will is strong enough. And sure as shootin', you'll best remember that lesson when times get tough. A man or a woman ain't nothin' without courage, but with courage, well, he can move mountains. Now, hush up and hold your horses, 'cause we ain't done yet. There's more to John Henry than hammer and steel, and the story's about to take a turn that'll leave your hearts pounding. Asterisk, all right. You'll keep your seats warm, 'cause we're getting into the part where the tale turns real deep. And don't forget, shout out again where you're watching from, and what time it is. That way this old story feels alive, like we're all sitting on the porch, passing the sweet tea, round dot. By late afternoon, John Henry was feeling every inch of that fight. Muscles burned like fire running through cold iron, veins standing proud on his arms, hands calloused, palms raw. Yet he swung on. Every strike carried a rhythm that seemed older than the hills themselves, older than any tale told round a hearth. The men standing nearby whispered among themselves, worry and wonder tangled in their voices. Could a man truly outwork a machine? Could heart and sweat defy pistons and gears? One of the children clutched my arm, eyes wide. "Grandpappy, don't his arms hurt? Ain't he tired?" I chuckled low. "Sure as shootin', child, he's tired. Darn near every bone in his body aches something fierce. But John Henry, he's driven by something stronger than muscle. He's driven by pride, by hope, by the spirit of all them men who came before him and all them who come after. When your heart's heavy with purpose, the body finds a way to follow. The sun dipped lower, painting the tunnel with gold and shadow. Sweat soaked through his clothes, mixing with dust from the rock, and yet he swung. Bam, 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 each strike rang true, echoing off stone walls like a drumbeat for the ages. The machine hissed and sputtered, trying to keep pace, but John Henry's hammer never faltered. Not once. I leaned closer to the children. Y'all hear that? That there is the sound of willpower. That there is a man showing the world that he won't be beat. No matter what comes at him, no matter how fast or fierce, he stands. He fights. He proves he's alive. The crowd of men watching whispered among themselves, some chewing their beards, others shuffling their boots nervously. Nobody had ever seen the like. Sweat ran down faces, eyes wide, mouths hanging open. They cheered in soft murmurs, then loud shouts, then quiet awe. It was a kind of reverence you don't see often when a man shows his heart more than his hands. Folks can't help but notice. John Henry's arms ached, his back screamed, yet he felt something stronger, something that made his spirit lighter than air. It wasn't just a contest. It was a statement. Every swing of that hammer said, I belong here. I am more than flesh. I am more than the machine. As the sun vanished behind the hills, the drill began to fail, slow and sputtering. The men gasped, eyes fixed on John Henry's steady arms, and the children gasped too, holding their breath as if they could feel the weight of every strike. By golly, that moment heart meeting steel, man meeting machine, was something the world would remember long after the dust settled. And you out there, leaning in close, can feel it in your bones too. John Henry's fight wasn't just about the rails, nor the stone, nor the steam drill. It was about proving that courage, heart, and grit still mattered in a changing world. Hold tight, y'all. The story ain't finished, and the lesson he leaves behind? Well, that's something mighty special. Sure as shootin' asterisk or right now, y'all. Lean in close, 'cause this here's the part where things get mighty somber, yet powerful. And don't you forget, tell me again where you're watching from and what time it is. Makes me feel like we're all sittin' on this OL porch together, passing stories like pie and T-dot. By this point, John Henry's arms were near spent, muscles tight as twisted rope, sweat running down his face in rivers, hands raw and calloused. Yet he swung that hammer like it weighed nothing at all. Every strike carried the heartbeat of a man fighting, not just a machine, but the very notion that human toil could be replaced, that human spirit could be silenced. At one of the young uns whispered, "Grandpappy, won't he hurt himself?" I shook my head slow. Ain't no man without pain, child. But John Henry's will was stronger than the ache. Ain't no rock, no steel, no piston stronger than a man determined to make his stand. That hammer, it's more than iron, it's the measure of heart, and his heart's mighty indeed. The steam drill sputtered and slowed, pistons groaning like old mules, valves letting out hissing steam. Folks stood there, eyes wide, breath catching in their chests. Some whispered prayers, some held their hats tight, some just stared, awestruck. And John Henry? He didn't even notice the crowd. His focus was all on the rhythm hammer against stone, soul against iron. By golly, I reckon y'all can picture it. That tunnel, dark and mean as sin, lit with the dust motes floating in the last rays of the sun. the children leaning in close, holding their breath, and you out there feeling the tension all the way across wherever you're sitting. Every swing was a defiance, every drop of sweat a testament. John Henry wasn't just working rails, he was showing the world that flesh and spirit still held weight, even in a world chasing progress. The drill gave one last reluctant hiss and slowed to a halt, unable to match the steady, unyielding power of a man determined to prove his worth. John Henry swung once more, hard and true, driven the final spike deep into the mountain. And then he stood there, chest heaving, hands blistered, but eyes bright with a fire that no machine could ever match. "By golly," I said, whispering like the wind through the pines, "that man done more than drive steel. He drove a message into the heart of the world, that courage, pride, and determination can still stand tall, no matter what comes at ye." The children let out little gasps and whispers, some reaching for my hand, and I reckon you feel it too, the weight of something bigger than the story itself. That day, John Henry showed the world that human spirit ain't nothing to underestimate, and that even against the cold, unfeeling march of progress, heart can carry a man farther than any machine ever could. Hold your horses. 'Cause the tale's almost done, and the lesson left behind, well, it'll stick with you long after the hammer's quiet. All right, y'all, here we are at the final stretch. Lean in close, and don't forget to tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. Makes an old story feel alive when I know y'all are sitting with me, even if it's through a screen dot. By the time the sun dipped low behind the hills, John Henry's body was near spent. Muscles screamed, sweat soaked every inch, and his hands were raw as the earth he'd been hammering all day. Yet he stood tall, hammer in hand, chest heaving, eyes burning with a fire that no machine could ever touch. He'd given every ounce of himself, every beat of his heart, every drop of sweat and pride, to prove something bigger than any of us, that a human soul, driven by will and courage, can stand against even the fiercest odds. One of the children whispered softly, "Grandpappy, did he make it?" I leaned in, voice low as the wind through pines. "Child, he done more than make it. He done showed the world what a man can do when he puts his heart into something. That hammer of his wasn't just iron meeting stone, it was spirit meeting challenge, will meeting fate. And by golly, he proved that a man ain't just flesh and bone. He's the sum of every hope, every prayer, every ounce of pride in his heart." The machine lay still, pistons cooled, valves silent. John Henry leaned against his hammer, chest heaving, eyes misty but proud. Men crowded round, mouths hanging open, some whispering praises, some chewing on their disbelief. The children sat in awe, some reaching for my hand, some just quiet, letting the weight of what they'd seen sink in. "Grandpappy," one little one said, voice trembling, "was he tired?" I chuckled low. Lordy, yes, he was tired. Tired enough to shake the hills themselves. But sometimes, darling, that's the price of showing the world what you're made of. Sometimes giving every ounce of yourself leaves you empty, but it leaves a mark that lasts forever. John Henry done left his mark, clear as daylight and strong as the steel he drove. And you, listening out there, wherever you may be, feel that weight too. That's the power of a man who dared to challenge what seemed unstoppable, who swung his hammer against the tide of progress and left a legacy that echoes long after the iron cooled. By golly, the story don't end with just victory over a machine. It ends with the truth every one of us carries. Heart, courage, and pride can push a soul farther than any machine ever will. John Henry gave the world more than a contest. He gave it a legend, and that legend lives on in every beat of human spirit that refuses to quit. So lean back, young'uns, smile at the wonder of it all, and remember this: the next time something mighty tries to push you down, swing your own hammer of will, and by golly, make your mark. And with that, the tale of John Henry the Steel Drivin Man rests, echoing through hills, hearts, and time itself.